Hello, everyone. Happy 2024. Welcome to another episode of the Lunatics Radio Hour podcast. I'm Abby Brenker, sitting...
You're doing a great job. That was your best intro of the year.
Thank you. I'm Abby Brenker, sitting here with Alan Kudan.
Hello.
And today we are talking about the intersection between amusement parks and horror.
Oh.
The Venn diagram, if you will.
Okay, I just thought we were talking about spooky amusement park things.
Yes, well, that's one way to define it for sure.
So I'm curious, because I haven't looked at your outline for this one.
Mm-hmm. As usual.
I mean, no, normally I do hundreds of hours of prep per episode. But this one I did not. So
I'm just carrying the show on my back.
But on this one, I'm curious where we're drawing the line.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just amusement parks? Is it going to be amusement parks in circuses? Is it going to be amusement parks, circuses, and haunted houses?
No, it will be mainly amusement parks because I certainly got into this, right, when I was researching it. This could be a 6-month series in reality if you're going to talk about carnivals and circuses and fun houses and haunted houses. So we're going to keep it a little more contained and talk mostly about amusement parks. There's a few park type things that someone might fight me on the definition of it, but generally that's what we're talking about.
So first question.
Yeah.
What is the difference really between a fun house and a haunted house?
They're both rides. It really depends, right? But if we're talking about them as attractions,
I am.
Then they're both rides, right? A haunted house is scarier. A fun house could just be one of those things where you walk down that tunnel, right? And that's spinning. It's like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but those are so scary too.
Well, it depends on the person. I found that to be fun.
They're terrifying.
You know the scene at the end of Grease?
Do you think I know the end of Grease?
It's really talking to the listeners. So the scene at the end of Grease where Sandy and Danny are singing to each other, "You're the one that I want," that's a fun house.
Ooh.
There you go. Yeah, they're at a fun house in that moment.
Why?
Because they're at a carnival.
Which is encapsulated in this episode.
No, not really.
I'm so confused. Well, okay,
a carnival is like an in this is all through our lens today because carnivals have been different things, but through our lens today, carnivals are like traveling amusement parks.
Right, it's a less permanent amusement park.
But I'm just not harping on them much today. That's all.
I know that we watched a movie that had carnival right in the name.
Yeah, we could. I'm not going to be a stickler for definitions today.
I'm just trying to iron this one out so that people aren't misled.
It's okay. I think I'll make it clear as we go. How about that?
Sure.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about the intersection of horror, history, and amusement parks. As usual, I suppose this episode has gone in a direction that was a little bit surprising for me, a little bit different than when I was initially had a vision for this. So I found that I personally have a bit of a fascination with this idea of like old-timey amusement parks, like amusement parks in the 1800s. You know, people in suits and petticoats like going on roller coasters. It's just such a funny juxtaposition in my brain.
When did roller coasters start being a thing?
We're going to talk about that, Alan, but they date back much farther than you expect. That's the fun part of this episode.
You just said 1800s, and I just...
Even farther than that, roller coasters date back.
Really? So George Washington went on roller coasters?
No, I'm not going to make a claim about that. I do know Catherine the Great of Russia did.
And what year was she?
A long time ago.
A long time ago.
Long time.
Nobody knows.
So, for example, I want to talk about Sea Lion Park, which we're going to come back to, but Sea Lion Park was part of Coney Island in New York City, and it opened in the late 1800s. It closed in the early 1900s.
Are you talking about the aquarium?
No, Sea Lion Park.
Is this like SeaWorld?
Yes, kind of. But
Okay,
it included a roller coaster that people, again, in their suits, they would go on the roller coaster. And there was also a water ride called Water Shoot or Shoot the Chute, which was very similar, I guess, to kind of like a Splash Mountain type of a thing. But people in their clothes from the 1800s there's photos of it online. It's fascinating to me.
Abby, you just dated yourself.
Why?
Splash Mountain got canceled.
I know, but that's, I think, the most ubiquitous example for this.
Interesting, because that's very off-brand for you.
So let's talk about the history of theme parks, the history of rides, the urban legends and dark events that have taken place at parks, and the best horror movies centered around amusement parks. Our sources for today: a Vox article by Arthur Levine, The Story of Amusement Parks is the Story of America; Smithsonian Magazine article by Kat Eschner, The Dizzy History of Carousels Began with Knights; an Ask.com article by Allyson Chen, Abandoned Amusement Parks with Even Creepier Backstories; the Travel article by Laurence Watt, Haunted Theme Parks That Were Abandoned; a Mental Floss article by Michelle Herman, 11 Fun Facts About Coney Island; a worldabandoned.com article on Nara Dreamland; and of course Atlas Obscura, Wikipedia, and IMDb. In order to talk about the horror of amusement parks, let us first talk about the history of these parks themselves. They are a clear evolution from traveling fairs, festivals, and pleasure gardens, which I will define for you, Alan, in a moment. I know your question is coming.
No, I know what a pleasure garden is.
Let's talk specifically about periodic fairs first, which date back to the Middle Ages. One of the earliest was the Bartholomew Fair, dating back to 1133 in England. This was a charter fair, meaning the fair was granted by King Henry I to fund the Priory of Bartholomew. It lasted until the mid-1800s.
Abby, what's a priory?
For priests.
A priory is for priests?
Yeah, it's like a monastery for dudes. It lasted until the mid-1800s when it was forced to close due to quote-unquote public disturbances. It took place every August 24th, and the fair evolved over the years, but generally consisted of attractions, freak shows, juggling, magic shows, acrobats, and menageries. Pleasure gardens date back to ancient times. There are actually some really wild illustrations you can find online to show you maps of these. They sort of evolved from gardens with temples and pavilions and sculptures that rich people had on their properties, to gardens with active entertainment and rides, concerts, zoos, etc., that sort of thing.
Yeah, what is a ride in the 12th century entail?
You're really trying to jump the progress. It's coming. I will explain it.
It's the natural progression of thought.
Well, don't worry. It's coming soon. It's very soon. Sentences away. And of course, traveling fairs predate amusement parks. Again, very similar to a carnival, right? There's also a tradition that predated theme parks, exhibitions like the World's Fair. The first World's Fair was held in Prague in 1791. Historically, World's Fairs are exhibitions meant to display the accomplishments of nations globally. Chicago hosted 2 World's Fairs in the U.S., the first in 1893 and the second in 1933. But what really helps define an amusement park, at least in modern terms, are the rides. You with me?
I'm patiently waiting to find out what a ride in the 12th century is like.
The earliest roller coaster is credited as being a frozen Russian hill that people would slide down.
That's called sledding.
But man-made hills.
Oh.
In 1784, Catherine the Great of Russia developed a summer version of the ride at her estate and added tracks and wheeled carts.
Did you say 784?
1784.
Oh. I was like, well, okay, first off, we now have a date for Catherine the Great.
Thank God.
This was not unknown. Or at least, I don't know. Maybe
of course it's not unknown.
Maybe we just discovered it.
Someone give us a prize.
Write the Smithsonian.
The word carousel can be traced back to Arabian and Turkish descent, meaning little war. Historically, it was a training exercise in which a clay ball would be tossed between riders. The ball was filled with perfume, and if the rider dropped the ball, he would smell of perfume like his punishment.
Wait, what? How does that work?
They're just throwing a clay ball filled with perfume, and I think if it cracks or breaks,
sealed. It's like an egg. Okay. If it breaks, they get splashed.
Yeah.
It's like a solid water balloon.
Right. The practice made its way to France, which gave us the term carousel. Quoting from the Smithsonian Magazine article by Kat Eschner, quote, "In order to prepare for these competitions, a practice device was created, which featured legless wooden horses suspended from arms on a central rotating pole. The pole was either rotated by human, horse, or mule, while the horsemen mounted on the wooden horses practice games, such as spearing a hanging ring with their jousting lances," end quote. So that's kind of the natural progression, where there was a lot of games, especially training games for knights and soldiers, where they would kind of circle each other on horses and either joust, try to get their jousting things in a ring, or throw these balls around. And so they then created this wooden structure to be able to do it without horses. And that then, over the years became like an amusement.
This is a reminder that we're all just animals. Take a look at like lions, how they play. They're all like roughhousing and everything, but it's all just like practicing stalking, practicing hunting.
Yeah.
It's just like building skills through the form of amusement.
I don't know if I have any hunting or stalking skills. I guess that should have been my resolution.
You're good at being both hunted and stalked. That's something.
There you go.
Can't play the game without someone like you.
And of course, carousels soon became a fairground attraction. Some were powered by hand crank, others by animals. And there was a brief stint of bicycle-powered carousels until the invention of steam-powered rides in the mid-1800s. And there's some, like big, like French coronations of kings and things, and they would bring in carousels. It was kind of like a special event thing.
Sure.
Yeah, so...
I've always been curious how the hell those break down, because they're huge, and they seem so solid. But, like, it all goes onto... previously it all got loaded onto trains, but now it can probably get broken down to a truck.
You know what? I just realized we have a piece of a carousel in our apartment.
We do.
My family gave it to me for my 30th birthday. I think my dad rescued it from an estate sale. And it's kind of like the light pillar. Is that how you would describe it? Of a carousel? It's like a head, like a masthead with 5 lights going down the front. We use it as a lamp.
It looks like a figurehead on a boat.
Yeah. It's very cool.
Yeah, but I mean, now it just haunts here instead of haunting wherever it previously was.
I love it.
It's so creepy.
It's like a feature of our apartment.
Yeah, and I had to cover the face because it was too soulless.
You put your like Yuletide mask on it.
It's the best I got. That's actually the mask of when I played the Green Man in my 5th grade musical production of, I think it was just called The Green Man.
Wow, I would love to see that musical. I didn't know Pan had his own musical.
Yep.
Wow, very cool. So Ferris wheels are another iconic amusement park ride, which started as pleasure wheels or hand-cranked wheels dating back to Bulgaria in the mid-1500s. I actually have a social media video with photos and illustrations that I'm going to post. So if you don't follow me, and you'll see some actual visual examples of this. The Ferris wheel as we know it today was invented by George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. for the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, so the first World's Fair in Chicago. But there's evidence that similar, if not smaller, versions existed long before Mr. Ferris, of course.
Did you know before it was called a Ferris wheel, it was called a pleasure wheel?
Mr. Ferris was actually inspired by a man named William Somers, who installed giant wheels called roundabouts across Asbury Park, Coney Island, and Atlantic City in 1892. And again, if you go to like the New York Public Library's digital archives, you can search for pictures of roundabouts, and it's very cool to see. So they were called roundabouts before Mr. Ferris came in and kind of stole the team project and took credit for it.
But before that, it was called a pleasure wheel.
Exactly.
And I learned about that from one of your little videos.
From my video that you have a sneak peek of.
I got a sneak peek?
Yeah, it's not yet live.
Actually, I didn't watch it. You just kept yelling, "Did you know?"
I think it's so fascinating.
You told like everybody. You told that little factoid like 3 times that week.
The thing is,
every time we were with a new group of people.
It's interesting. Why not share it?
I love your enthusiasm.
Thank you. Mechanical rides started to come onto the scene in the mid to late 1800s with the invention of new steam-powered technology, which sort of takes us to present day. Wikipedia has a list by state of abandoned amusement parks in the United States with hundreds of entries because they are so prominent. Let's talk about why. There's a Vox article written by Arthur Levine that I'm going to rely on quite a bit for the next few minutes here because it really dives into the politics of amusement parks in the United States. Levine talks about how parks are largely a reflection of society, a utopian manifestation of the American dream. And they provide an outlet for letting loose, screaming your lungs out, and dressing up as your favorite character. Quote, "What the Disney Company and other park operators took away from the Columbian Exposition and early iterations of amusement areas is that people enjoy marveling at and experiencing innovation, joining together with others whom they might not otherwise encounter, letting loose and disregarding the social conventions of the day, and engaging in something bigger than themselves and their everyday lives. They also learned that people love the physical sensations of mechanical rides. Visitors couldn't get enough of the Chicago Fair's ice railway, but they especially went bonkers for George Washington Gale Ferris's wheel," end quote.
You said it was an ice railway?
Yeah.
I assume it was like tobogganing.
Yeah, I think so.
It just reminded me, so I grew up in a town that has an amusement park. Lake George, New York has what was, I guess it's still known as the Great Escape, but it used to be an independently run theme park.
Yeah.
But then when the owner passed away, it got sold to Six Flags. Obviously that had a bigger influx and made the park bigger scale.
Yeah.
But with that also come the corporate shittiness, where previously there was just every year was one new attraction, every single year. Sometimes it was big, sometimes it was small, but they always were just
pushing forward
something charming,
yeah.
right? And opening day was always such a big deal about what ride.
Would you go all the
year.
time to opening day?
I don't think we did because
it's too crazy.
When you're locals, you just fuck it. You're just gonna wait until mid-season,
right? It
and
doesn't
then
matter.
Just go on a Thursday. One year they added something called the Alpine Bobsled. Okay, so I don't remember what year the Alpine Bobsled was introduced to the theme park, but it's definitely post the Lake Placid Winter Olympics. So, and even possibly post the Cool Runnings movie.
Sure. So it's a hot ticket item.
Yes. I mean, I didn't grow up that far from Lake Placid. So, it's in people's minds of the bobsled.
Sure.
And so this ride was emulating a bobsled, but without any ice or snow or anything. So it was like this giant half tube, and you would get in this thing that's still
like a luge?
Sort of, but it seated 12 people.
Oh, shit.
Not in a row, but on a roller coaster,
Yeah.
4 people abreast, multiple rows.
Yeah.
So even more than 12, actually, when I think about it. But, and then it would just go down this thing, and it had wheels. So it just gravity would keep it in the track until it didn't.
Yeah.
Because what they didn't factor in was rain makes things slippery.
Oh, God.
So nobody got hurt, but
that's surprising.
Yeah.
It flew off the tracks?
I think because they always do test runs.
Sure.
One time, I think this is how it happened because it was many years ago. One time, just during the warm-up run, it had rained the night before, and the thing derailed. And it's wow, that's weird. But and then it happened again, on another date. And they're okay, so this is every time the track is the littlest bit wet, people could die.
Yeah.
So obviously this was not the world's safest attraction, especially when, it's outdoors. So, rain happens
It
sometimes.
happens.
Especially in theme parks, you're out there having a great day and it rains because that's life. And then you die.
And then you go right off the tracks. And then you go right off the tracks. Yeah, I'm glad they caught it. They don't always catch it before, so that's good. I will say, Alan and I'll speak for myself. Surprisingly, perhaps to some, and not in a fanatical way, but I am a theme park person in that I enjoy rides a lot. I used to be really scared of them, but I've sort of had a come to Jesus moment with them.
Come to Jesus?
Yeah, I really sort of changed my tune, if you will.
What does that mean?
I love them now. I think they're
No, what does the term come to Jesus mean?
It means face up, here we go.
It's you sat down with Jesus and he showed you the way?
He said, listen, lady.
Listen here, bitch.
You're making a mistake. You're not living life to the fullest. But obviously there are some risk associated with theme parks. But we've been to Disney a few times. The most fun I've ever had in my entire life, maybe, is when we went to the Great Escape in Alan's hometown and it was closed. It was an evening gala event, and we got to just ride every ride without lines. That was incredibly fun.
Eventually, they just closed the Alpine Bobsled completely, and then it just became this very abandoned-looking thing in this not abandoned theme park.
'Tis how it goes. A recurring theme for today.
It's a bummer because it was right next to my favorite, the only water slide that I really liked. I never liked water slides at all.
That tracks.
I always got stuck in them.
Yeah. Too gangly.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's physics, right? I'm shaped like a clog.
You're shaped like a clog?
I'm shaped like a hair clog.
You're not. You're shaped like a plunger handle.
Okay. Anyways, I mean, yeah, it's physics, right? But anyways, this was a completely black enclosed water slide. So there was no light when you went in, which was kind of cool. You're basically going through sewer pipes.
Mm-hmm.
They call it the Black Cobra because, look like a black
snake
cobra.
Cool.
And it was a lot of fun. And you didn't go on, you got on a little raft to go down it.
Yeah.
But it's still like by yourself. It's a very small raft. But that eventually closed as well for safety concerns.
Wow.
Yeah.
2 for 0 for 2 at the Great Escape.
Yep. But the pirate ship's still there.
Yeah, we went on it. I loved it.
I'm sorry. I've digressed far too much talking about the Great Escape. I assume it is not on your list of haunted amusement parks.
Correct. But I do want to say that, so what we were talking about before, right, was that parks kind of came to be because it was very obvious that Americans, and parks are global. It's not specific to America, but especially in America, folks needed like this escape, right? This distraction from life, this need to scream at the top of your lungs and have fun and blah, blah, blah. And we see a lot of that with like a Disney of today, right? Disney's got a handle on all that.
No, it's actually really interesting because that was a big talking point in the 1987 Funland. That was what it was called? Funland, right?
Funland.
Yeah, so that was just one of the movies that we watched for preparation of this. But it's like there's so much discussion about like why theme parks? Like why are they going to all this trouble to make the park into what it is?
Yeah.
It's not a very good horror film, but it is very good about just discussing park management.
Yeah, it's I described it as the Shin Godzilla of amusement park horror films because let me finish. Because it is all about the bureaucracy of running a park in the same way that Shin Godzilla shows bureaucracy and how laughable it can be sometimes, and everyone gets in their own way. Anyway, I digress.
I will agree to disagree.
That's fine. So in addition to Disney, Coney Island in Brooklyn, New York, was actually an incredibly influential amusement park when examining the history of these attractions, mainly because of its importance to the immigrant population in New York City. Quoting again from Levine, quote, "Located 9 miles from Manhattan, but seemingly a world away, and about 10 degrees cooler, city dwellers were already drawn to the natural beauty of the remote barrier island. They really began coming in droves once horse-drawn trolleys, steam railroads, steamboats, and the subway established service in the later part of the 1800s and the early 1900s. The millions of immigrants who poured into New York at the turn of the century visited Coney Island, ran many of its businesses, and invented and manufactured the rides that lined its boardwalk," end quote.
So, like most things in America, it was made by immigrants.
There you go. From 1880 until World War II, Coney Island was the largest amusement park in the country.
Really?
Not only that, it was actually one of the parks in Coney Island was the first to accept tickets, like for entry, making it the first like enclosed amusement park ever.
Wow. It's so small now.
Yeah, there was still here. Let's talk about that because that's a great point. Coney Island itself is a peninsula-based neighborhood in Brooklyn, for anyone not familiar. At its peak, the millions of annual visitors had the choice of 3 different parks that were located here, including Luna Park, Dreamland, and Steeplechase Park. For about a 10-year period, Sea Lion Park, which I talked about earlier, was also located in the area, which was the first park to charge admittance fees. This was replaced by Luna Park in 1903. We can also thank Coney Island for the first roller coaster as we know them today. In June of 1884, the Switchback Railway was built. The ride was invented by Lamarcus A. Thompson. It was a 600-foot track with a car powered by gravity that ran about 6 miles an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, very slow by today's standards. They would simply remove the car and place it back at the beginning for the next group of riders.
Wait, what?
There was no like mechanical system to it, so they would just take the car off the track and roll it to the beginning of...
It didn't loop?
Right.
Wow. It's an oversight.
Or maybe it looped, I don't know, but they would have to sort of reset it manually because there was no gears or like any kind of mechanics to it. It was just a gravity coaster.
Yeah, but that still means you need to lift it high enough to get it back on track.
Yeah. Well, I'm fuzzy on the logistics of it, but manual reset.
It'd be insane for it to just go straight and then them to carry it all the way back. But
Let's see if I can find a picture.
But also, I don't know, we're looking through the lens of history. We're also looking through the lens of better ideas throughout history.
So I just found a bunch of pictures and a diagram. I definitely encourage you to check it out. But what's happening is that there's 2 railways on each side, and they crisscross. And so when the car sort of returns on one end, there's like a way to lift it up, like with pulleys, to the top of the course.
So looking at the schematics here.
Yeah.
So picture two towers and these hobbits. No. These two towers that are about 2 football fields distance from each other.
Yeah.
Both of them have a track that leads from the top of one tower to the bottom of the other. Guests would, climb some stairs into the top of a tower, get into a car, and then ride it all the way down to the bottom of the other. And then there'd be some kind of hoist that would bring the car up the tower to then ride down the other track and reset. I think it's the dual track system that makes this pretty smart.
I'm just so enamored with looking at pictures of old-timey people on roller coasters.
With their big hats and top coats.
I love it. It's so funny.
Sorry, there's no such thing as a top coat. Is there?
Sure.
I know there's a petticoat and a top hat. I think I just combined the two.
I've ridden on both the steeplechase at Coney Island, which requires you to hang on for dear life, and even now it feels very unsafe, but back in the day you literally had to hold on with no harness at all. And so when like a guy and his girlfriend, and this is like the example that they always say, were on it, like he would have to physically hold her onto the ride.
Right, because she's too frail to hold herself.
Exactly. I've also, the Cyclone, which is in Coney Island, is one of my favorite roller coasters of all time.
It's a rickety mess.
Joyful. It's just so joyful.
It is a lot of fun.
Also, not really ride related, but there was an elephant-shaped hotel in Coney Island called the Elephantine Colossus, which check out Lunatics Project on Instagram because I have some pictures coming for you. Don't worry.
You photographed this yourself?
Exactly. Coney Island is also famous for its sideshows. But famously, these sideshows were also the home of the invention of incubators for premature babies.
Wait, what?
Quoting from the Mental Floss article, quote, in 1903, a man named Dr. Martin Coney, which spelled differently than Coney Island, developed a public exhibit in Coney Island that drew crowds with a sign saying, live babies in incubators. The setup involved rows of premature or weak babies in see-through glass cases, tended by a team of doctors and nurses. Viewers were charged admission.
That's crazy.
But the parents didn't have to pay for their kids to receive care in the infantorium. Coney also put on a similar showing at the 1933-34 Chicago World's Fair. After that, the Windy City became the first city in the country to adopt a comprehensive health policy for premature babies, end quote.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what year was this? Approximately?
The incubator? 1903.
Okay, so before 1903, if your baby was premature, you're just kind of fucked.
I don't know exactly the health history of it, but there was no incubators. This man invented them and sort of introduced it to the world as a sideshow act at Coney Island.
Wow. Can you imagine obviously this guy is pretty gifted in medical science, and his gut reaction is not to be like, this should be in hospitals. It's, you know what? Babies are fucking weird.
No, I think that there's a difference in the way we think about this and the way they thought about it at the time. So let me jump in. It wasn't a freak show. It was a sideshow. But also, think about the World's Fair.
I'm sorry. What is the difference between a freak show and a sideshow?
A freak show is more historically people with anatomical differences, I would say. Or like a woman covered in tattoos, something like that. Sideshows could be anything. Sideshows were marvels. Come pay 5 cents and look at this, that kind of a thing.
Right, the boy who looks like a bat.
No, but that's a freak show.
The bearded lady.
Here, let me say this. The thing that I think is missing from your brain is like when amusement parks actually came to be. Think about the World's Fair, right? It was more a reflection of the greatness of society. They were like an incubator for invention and entrepreneurship. Like Epcot is kind of like maybe encapsulates that.
Come see the world of tomorrow.
Right. So when you're thinking about this kind of gray area, especially around the turn of the century between amusement parks and things like the World's Fair, it was thought of as like the homeland for innovation. Like roller coasters were brand new. It was an innovation. So this new medical science wasn't like it was at a freak show. It was at this place where people thought this great stuff came and the newest technology came, which is still kind of how we think of amusement parks to some degree, but not, of course, for like medical advancement.
I guess we're still only a matter of decades out from like the traveling medicine man peddling his wares. I can't remember what the movie was, but there was like the guy that travels around from town to town sharing the wonders of refrigeration because it blows people's mind. Not having to use ice in order to make something cold. And so, but yeah, they would just travel from town to town showing this thing off.
That's exactly right. Yes, exactly. So something like refrigeration, could have been featured at a Coney Island booth for sure. But it's like now if somebody was like, I have this new medical advancement technology for babies, they're not going to display it at Six Flags. It's a totally different thing. But at the time, it was like exactly what people did. Rounding out this sort of historic deep dive here, quoting again from Levine, quote, "Screaming was not the only inhibition that amusement rides shattered. By choice, or more often by design, New York City immigrants largely kept to themselves in their own tenement neighborhoods and conformed to the morals of the old country, but not at Coney Island," end quote.
I do think that at some point we should do a deep dive into just the haunted history of Coney Island. I hope that's not everything we have already on this episode.
Oh, I'm sure I could spend a week on Coney Island. There's so much to say.
That'd be fun.
I do want to round us out with this note, though. Round us out of this sort of history portion here. Mm-hmm. Again, quoting from Levine, quote, "Of course, parks have not always been shared by all Americans. The reality of racism and the denial of civil rights long clashed with parks' carefully crafted fantasy that owners of parks such as Belle Isle in Detroit, Edora Park in Ohio, Glen Echo Park in Maryland, and others prohibited Black patrons as late as the 1960s. Some of them were sites of protests, riots, and clashes. Federal courts intervened, and under order, parks eventually complied and opened to people of color," end quote. So that, I'm hoping, is a somewhat comprehensive overview of the history of theme parks in the United States.
I'd say. But, Abby, when do they get haunted?
So, when they go untouched, as we all do. So there's two different pathways that we could take here, right? When we talk about modern theme parks and how they intersect with horror. And I'm going to very clearly take one route and not the other. Sadly, theme park rides can malfunction, as Alan said, right? Either due to human or mechanical error. But I'm not going to dwell on theme park accidents unless they're part of the urban legends that we're going to discuss, because I know that they're plentiful, but they're tragic, and some of them are recent, and just out of respect for people and families,
we'll keep those to other podcasts.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit more about urban legends for the most part. There's a few things we'll mention, but we're not going to dwell. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park is an abandoned park located in Princeton, West Virginia. It first opened in 1926 and eventually closed in 1988. Lake Shawnee is particularly rife with urban legends and local lore. I do want to give a quick content warning on this story because it does talk about the murder of Native Americans in the 1700s. In 1926, Lake Shawnee opened its doors and offered visitors a Ferris wheel, swimming pool, racetrack, dance hall, and a swing ride.
A swing ride, you say?
Like the flying swings.
I do like the flying trapeze swing.
What's the flying trapeze swing?
It's just the name of the ride at the...
Oh. You know that ride, the Gravitron?
Yeah, it goes in a million names. I knew it as the rotor. But yeah, it's just...
Where you go to the walls and the floor drops out.
Yeah, and you just get... I always forget. Is it centripetal force or centrifugal force? It's centrifugal.
There you go. Never heard of that word before.
Really?
Really.
Okay, so centripetal force is going towards the center, towards the axis that's spinning. And centrifugal force is going from the center point outwards.
I understand. The more you know. So back to Lake Shawnee here. So coal mining was a big industry in the Lake Shawnee area, and families of miners enjoyed bringing their children here. But the park had a hard time maintaining momentum. And around 1966, 1967, the park closed. Now, I found some conflicting reports as to why. One source said the park did not pass a health inspection, and another said that 2 children were killed on a ride, and of course, both could be true. In 1987, it reopened for less than a year before closing again due to increased insurance rates. After it closed its doors, the owner tried to find other uses for the land and brought on a crew to create a roadway for motorists. The crew uncovered Native American artifacts and eventually unearthed 13 Native American skeletons.
Where was this in the U.S. again?
West Virginia.
Huh. It's just wild. Like, you can bury a body in the woods and it's like gone in, a matter of decades.
From experience?
From decay. You bury somebody in the desert and they're mummified. They're there forever. The fact that a body...
Wait, you're saying if you bury a body in the woods, it disappears?
Eventually, even the bones decay. Yeah.
I don't think in a matter of decades.
According to Google, it takes about 20 years for an untreated body to completely decompose. So, that means bones and all, no trace, nothing.
Fascinating. I would have never thought that.
Well, right, because, we find bodies in the desert that are thousands of years old, but it's just so arid that, there's no, acid in the soil or water to do...
Or bog bodies.
Yes. Why is the bog... I forget, obviously
there's a mineral in it that preserves
it's
them.
Just, exactly. Because, again, it just kills the bacteria. If there's no bacteria to break these things down, as long as insects and everything else, then the body's going to stick around. Otherwise, 20 years.
Interesting.
So if you murder someone 20 years later, scot-free.
Though the story goes back even further. In 1783, Native Americans killed 3 of the 13 clay children of colonizers settling in the area. And in order to seek revenge, the father and several local men killed multiple indigenous people who they suspected to have been involved. This was well documented and is known as the Clover Bottom Massacre. You can piece together the legends of cursed land that follow this property for years to come, only solidified further with the discovery of skeletons on the land. Lake Shawnee has been featured on many paranormal investigation shows and is well documented by visitors. The park is currently visit by appointment only and sometimes opens for paranormal tours. Almost every list of haunted or abandoned amusement parks starts with Nara Dreamland in Japan.
Nara Dreamland?
Nara Dreamland.
Is this on Nara Island?
It is in Nara, but Nara is not an island.
I was making an educated guess. Clearly, my education was flawed.
The park was constructed in 1961 and modeled after the original Disneyland in California. There are even copied rides and sections from the original Disney. It was a huge success and at its peak hosted 2 million visitors a year. The man behind Nara Dreamland was directly influenced by Disney and struck a deal with the company, but at a point grew frustrated with the licensing fee that Disney was collecting. So after this, Nara Dreamland shifted to making its own rides and mascots to avoid the payment of the fee. But it's kind of like everyone marvels at it as a really dystopian example of an abandoned amusement park because when you go in, it's like literally verbatim, like a recreation of Disneyland, but it's abandoned.
All like decayed and shit.
Right. Like all of the welcome stuff, everything that you would see in California today actively, but it's like a wasteland.
That's cool.
Yeah. In 1983, Disneyland Tokyo opened in Japan, and it completely stole all of the attention away from Nara Dreamland. A supermarket chain actually purchased the park in 1993, but without any major improvements, it remained on the decline, especially after Universal opened a park nearby in 2001. It officially closed its doors in 2006.
That's not that long ago.
No.
So it might still be there decaying.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's rare. Here's the thing. It is fairly rare, I found in my research. It does happen. For the reason why abandoned amusement parks linger for so long is because of the cost of removing these huge, massive rides and infrastructure that's built. Like in a lot of cases, it's easier and cheaper to leave it versus knocking it down because it's so expensive. And if you're bankrupt because you're running this thing and, there's no buyers because nothing is safe, it's like you really have to just want that land really badly.
Man, you think you could sell it for scrap? It's a lot of metal.
Yeah. I don't know we'd have to talk to an expert.
My father has scrapped many a ride.
I'm sure he has. Also in Japan was Kijonuma Leisureland, which has a fascinating legend attached to it.
Okay.
A real haunted amusement park, if you will.
How haunted we talking?
Real haunted. I'm going to quote from an Ask.com article by Allyson Chen.
Previously known as Ask Jeeves.
Is it? I think that's different.
Ask.com?
Yeah.
Yeah, they just dropped Jeeves. It's the same company.
Interesting. Well, Allyson Chen, I will say, she does a great job at providing the creepy backstories associated with a lot of these amusement parks. So she did a great job collecting the urban legends, if you will. So I'm going to quote from her. Quote, Kijanuma Leisureland was home to all the typical amusement park rides, but it also housed something darker. Japanese legend says that a woman gave birth to a snake on the grounds. The snake baby then escaped into the water,
Snaby.
constantly crying for her mother and slowly driving her mad. The woman committed suicide by drowning herself in the lake. Some explorers say their cries can be heard when visiting the park grounds at night. Visitation remained high until 2000, and the park finally closed. Tourists can now wander the grounds and watch nature consume the slowly rusting Ferris wheel and other attractions, end quote. I thought I wanted to include that one because it feels like it has the most defined legend attached to it, the most specific.
I thought you were going to say the most plausible. I'm like, oh, she's giving birth to snakes.
Yeah, like I'm partially curious if anybody is local to that area or knows more, like why birth to snakes. How did it come to be?
So there I was, birthing a snake.
Ugh, terrible. Thanks, Al. It's claimed that disembodied laughter of children can still be heard at the abandoned Six Flags New Orleans. Six Flags New Orleans was first called Jazzland when it opened in 2000, and I believe, I am pretty sure, that it was actually the largest Six Flags to have ever been made.
Previously Jazzland?
Previously Jazzland.
I want to go to Jazzland.
Well, you can't. 3 years later, after an infusion of money from Six Flags, the park reopened in 2003 with the Six Flags name. After Katrina hit in 2005, the park closed and never reopened. And you can actually, if you Google this, see images, which like for weeks after I think was the case, of the park totally flooded.
Sure.
Like 6 feet of water. Like the whole thing it looks just like an amusement park peeking up from the water. It's crazy.
That was so much in New Orleans.
Yeah, I know. But I think it's just that the scale of a roller coaster. And so when you see the water coming up that high on something that massive, it puts it into a perspective for you.
Oh, floods in general. Anytime you see them water where it's not supposed to be, it's just so unsettling.
Yeah.
Anytime you see something submerged in water that's not supposed to be submerged in water, it can trigger a fear response in people, which is known as submechophobia.
That Alan has. Also, obviously, like a big part of this is the visual of these abandoned parks, right? So I do have an article on lunaticsproject.com. I just pick out 5 of them and kind of show some examples, but it's a cool, it's kind of the missing piece of this episode because you want to see these like crazy dystopian universes of these parks. So back to Six Flags New Orleans. Several rides were removed and taken to other parks, but that was kind of all they could salvage. Since its closure, the space has been used as a filming location, notably for Percy Jackson's Sea of Monsters, Jurassic World, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and Deepwater Horizon. We also have to pause because I want to talk a little bit, very briefly, about Six Flags in general. Recently, I found out for the first time what flags, the Six Flags brand name, is actually referring to.
Oh, do tell.
And those are the flags of the different quote-unquote nations that have governed Texas, where the company first began in 1957. So, Alan, do you know which flags those are?
So there's the U.S. government.
Correct.
The Confederate government.
Boo, yes, correct.
That's all I got.
The Republic of Texas, Spain, France, and Mexico. But, yikes. Anyway, I just thought I would leave that here. We can't talk about amusement parks without talking about Dottie Park in Belgium.
I was waiting for Dottie Park in Belgium. Of course we can't.
Thanks for keeping me humble, Alan. The now defunct park started as a playground at a church in 1950, specifically designed for the children of pilgrims visiting the nearby basilica. So you can file this one under religious amusement parks. There'll be another one later. Over the next 30 years, it morphed into an amusement park with full-blown rides, offering entertainment for visiting tourists. At its peak, it welcomed about 1 million visitors a year. So again, it's really capitalizing on the fact that because of this basilica, there's an influx of pilgrims, and we can turn that into entertainment, right?
Of course we can.
It's also held the record for Europe's longest monkey bridge for a period of time.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the world's largest monkey bridge was in South America.
Yeah, so it only briefly held the title, not forever. Sadly, the rides did not get the maintenance they needed to stay safe, and in 2000, a boy lost his arm on the Nautic jet ride, which caused the park to close for quote-unquote renovations.
Okay, what is the Nautic jet ride?
It's sort of like a water slide with a car.
I highly recommend everyone Google Nautic jet ride because it's freaking wild. So it's like this track that a boat flies down and then eventually hits water. And then, I assume just the momentum carries it across the water. But there are pictures of people just flying. It's amazing the kid only lost his arm.
A miracle, they say. The park never reopened. And finally, in 2017, it was demolished. So this is one of those examples of parks that were totally demolished.
There's instructions on how to build one at home.
What do you need?
There's whole schematics, so there's quite a bit involved. And this one does not look safe at all. There's nothing that even keeps you on the track. It's
Gravity.
It's a boat that's just like an upside down horseshoe. It's like a pontoon boat.
Have you seen those like mountain coasters that are like a single rail? It's like the same sort of thing to me, which I'm still like, how do they stay on it? Because it feels like they would just fly off.
A mountain coaster being like when you go down on wheels and there's like a single rail in the middle holding you on?
No wheels.
No wheels.
Yeah. Here, I'll find it.
It's like a sled thing and you have a brake?
Yeah, with a brake, yeah.
I've done the thing with the brake.
How does it stay on?
I mean, it's because it's got the rail.
Yeah, but how is it attached to the rail? It's just a single rail. It's not a double rail.
Right, but it's not on top of I'm assuming.
Here, let me show you.
It's got that it's like the sides of the rail are indented, kind of like an I-beam. And the wheels are both above and below. So you have wheels that are kind of like latching onto this rail in the middle. Like a clamp almost. So like, you know how a monorail works?
Yeah.
Like that.
Okay. Interesting.
If a monorail operated like a normal railroad track does, of just giant wheels on top, it would just fall off.
Exactly my concern, Alan. A German theme park called Spree Park in Berlin is also worth mentioning. The park is interesting because of the nefarious activities of the owner. It was built in East Berlin in 1969, and at its peak would host about 1 million visitors a year. It closed in 89 and reopened in 91 with a new owner, Norbert Witt. The park was open for about 11 years before police discovered that Witt had used pieces of the rides to smuggle cocaine when they were shipped from Peru to Europe.
Yeah, but everyone does that.
In 2014, the park was burned in an act of arson. Today, it's an abandoned area with a few remaining relics. I also have to mention Creepier Amusement Park in Ukraine, which was a sparkling new park in 1986. Unfortunately, no one ever rode a ride because the Chernobyl disaster happened less than a week before opening day.
Ah, jeez.
There was a rumor that the owners tried to open the park as a distraction, but an evacuation order put an end to that.
That'll do it.
You can still take tours to this day, and there's a lot of pictures online of people who have kind of urban explored it, if you will. But due to the radiation levels, it is not encouraged.
Oh, yeah, this amusement park is a level in Call of Duty.
There you go.
You can go there.
I mean, virtually, yeah.
Yeah, virtually.
Yeah.
But I remember that because it's this Ferris wheel, like with all this like tall grass growing.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, there's, Chernobyl nearby.
Yeah, it's one of the most haunting, I would say, in terms of imagery if you Google it.
Oh, right, because it's like completely been retaken by the wild.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also just sort of haunting because you know that people who are there are risking their own health to take these pictures.
Depends, but yes.
Yeah. It's certainly the most solemn, I would say, of amusement parks.
Mm.
Though I am always afraid of Disney, we're going to mention the rumors of why Disney's River Country closed. River Country was Disney's first amusement park
I'm sorry. Why are you always afraid of Disney?
because they're like the NFL, they're like the Marines of companies. Like they're going to slap us with like a,
The NFL
yeah.
is a villain in your mind.
NFL Films is one of the most intense media companies that's existed.
Yeah, the pioneer of almost every camera technology.
Yeah. I'm not going to fuck with either of them. River Country was Disney's first amusement park, and it opened in 1976 and closed in 2001. It was described as an old-fashioned swimming hole. Quoting from Wikipedia, quote, "There were several deaths that took place at River Country. The first was an 11-year-old boy who contracted amoebic meningoencephalitis, an amoebic infection of the brain. He got this from the water in 1980. Park officials noted that similar amoebic infections also occurred relatively frequently elsewhere, and said it was an inherent problem with freshwater lakes in warm weather, and thus could not be blamed on the park's water system. 3 other children had died in similarly questionable situations in Florida in the same month. The 2 other deaths at the park were from drowning in 1982 and 1989, end quote. After it closed, it spurred rumors. This is a prime example of local urban legends that spiral out of control. There was much talk of the, quote, brain-eating virus that killed children here. Typhoon Lagoon opened in 1989 and Blizzard Beach in 1995. Their success was far greater than River Country, which closed in 2001. Quoting again from Wikipedia, quote, "River Country is one of only 2 Disney parks to permanently close, along with Discovery Island, which is situated parallel to the water park. There are many similarities between the 2 closures, in that both closed permanently within 2 years of each other, and were both abandoned and never mentioned by Disney," end quote. One truly horrifying failure of a park was Warner Brothers' Jungle Habitat in New Jersey.
Oh, yeah?
Do you know about this?
No, but it sounds fun.
I think you're going to like it. The premise was an open concept zoo, sort of like an animal kingdom.
Oh, an OCZ.
The park housed over 1,500 wild and exotic animals, but as you might expect, the park was soon hit with a few hardships once a man and a woman were attacked by animals.
What kind of animals?
Angry ones. Not only that, but animals escaped into West Milford, New Jersey, the neighboring town, and a tuberculosis outbreak among the animals meant that several of them had to be put down, sadly.
Animals can get tuberculosis?
I know, that was shocking to me too.
Wow. They should bring them to,
Waverly Hills?
What's the island?
Roosevelt Island?
Roosevelt Island. Shove it full of elephants.
The land is now a public park for local residents, so happy ending. Okay, just a few more here. I want to talk about Holy Land, USA, which was located in Waterbury, Connecticut.
Of course it was.
Which is my father's hometown. So prepare for some personal stories.
So there I was, charging the Holy Land.
Holy Land was an 18-acre theme park inspired by the biblical Holy Land, Bethlehem and Jerusalem. It opened in 1955 and closed in 1984, but opened again in 2014. And I have driven by this place, Alan, like hundreds of times. So have you, actually. And I did not know that the big cross on the hill was this park. I don't know if it was I guess it's a theme park more than an amusement park.
What's the difference?
Well, just that there's no rides. I'm going to talk about what it is. It's more of like a ticketed situation.
A ticketed situation?
Yeah.
Like speeding?
Like you buy a ticket and you go in and you walk around and it's filled with little tiny, it's a little tiny replica town of
like a sideshow.
Jerusalem. Kind of.
There's no rides.
No.
None.
But when you talk about like the creepiest amusement parks, like all of these lists online, it's always there.
The Holy Land.
Holy Land.
Okay. It's not the?
Just Holy Land.
Just Holy Land.
It also has religious landmark status. And my dad said that he thinks it kind of popped up initially because of some quote-unquote miracle that was performed nearby.
Okay.
Quoting from Wikipedia, quote, "Among the original attractions at the site were a recreation of the Garden of Eden, a diorama depicting Daniel in the lion's den."
I'm sorry, there's a recreation of the Garden of Eden?
Yeah.
1-to-1?
No, I don't think 1-to-1. And various recreations of the life and ministry of Jesus.
Was there 2 of every animal, or is that just the ark?
That's just the ark. The centerpiece of the site was a 56-foot cross and an illuminated sign that read Holy Land, USA. During its peak years in the 1960s and 70s, Holy Land, USA attracted upwards of 40,000 visitors annually. Greco closed Holy Land, USA in 1984 with plans to improve and expand the site, but the work was left unfinished when Greco died in 1986. The property was left to the Religious Sisters of Philippi, end quote. And just a quick content warning here, I'm going to talk about sexual assault if you want to skip ahead a second. But on July 15th, 2010, 16-year-old Chloe Ottman was tragically raped and murdered at the site of the cross. The killer was caught and is serving 55 years in prison. Despite this tragedy, the park was able to come back to life in 2014. If you look up photos, it's truly a bizarre concept, a mini version of Jerusalem. And if you want to visit, the site has an official website with more information and an updated cross. It seems like you might need to sort of book a tour nowadays. It might not just be open, all the time. Also, my dad, who is raised Catholic and has visited many times as a kid and teen, I think he quoted me hundreds of times, told me about a nearby spot called Little Village in the woods of Middlebury next to Waterbury.
Is this where he goes running and finds the weird people?
That's a different story, oddly enough. It's officially called Little People's Village, and it's described as a complex of crumbling doll-sized houses next to the ruins of a stone house. And it certainly has a host of urban legends tied to it. One story goes that a woman living in the stone house over a century ago started to see fairies in the woods and thus created a village for them. There's also darker versions of this urban legend, including a man who started to hear voices demanding that they build this village for them, and then slowly continued to lose his mind until he took his life. One legend states that if you stay too long, the voices of little people will soon haunt your brain as well.
Are they little voices?
Little voices. And they're like tiny, like fairy-sized people. There's even a throne allegedly carved for the king of the little people.
What is it, for King Oberon?
Who's King Oberon?
King of the Fairies?
What fairies?
The fairies.
In what world?
Of the Fae.
From Celtic folklore?
Probably, but most notably from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream.
Okay, see, that is the question that I was asking.
What?
From Shakespeare. Thank you.
That's
Midsummer Night's Dream.
That's where most people know him from, but he's from mythology.
Okay. But the truth of all of it, sadly, Alan, is that there was no fairies in the woods of Middlebury, Connecticut. The truth is that Little People Village was once an attraction on a trolley line as part of the Lake Quasi Amusement Park. It was built in the early 1900s and was known as the Fairy Village. After the trolley went away, the village was no longer accessible outside of a hike in the woods, and it fell into disrepair, where people like my dad would hike up there with his friends all the time and cause chaos, I am sure. The final park to mention near my hometown also has a dark past. Rocky Point Amusement Park in Rhode Island. Rocky Point was famous for its dinner hall and over 25 other attractions. Quoting from Allyson, Chen, quote, "Shortly after the opening of the park, a 5-year-old girl was murdered by her father after they finished their meal at the dining hall. He took her to the edge of the water and bludgeoned her to death with a rock. The gruesome murder didn't mar the park's reputation, however, and it stayed open for more than 150 years. The park finally closed in 1995 due to financial issues, but you can still go explore the grounds," end quote. I have one final park.
Is this one I've heard of?
It's hard to say.
Okay, what is it?
It's one that I would like to go to, and in fact, I've put my name on a list.
Huh. Is it in the U.S.?
Yes.
Is it on the West Coast?
No.
Is it in Florida?
No.
Are there sea mammals there?
No.
I have no idea then.
Land of Oz.
What?
So Land of Oz is a strange one because it's still semi-active, but also
like Chernobyl,
but also somewhat not. And many people brought this up to me when I have talked to my friends and such about this episode. It's been brought up several times, so I thought it was worth mentioning. Land of Oz is a park based on the books by L. Frank Baum. It's located in Beech Mountain, North Carolina. The park opened in 1970 and remained open for 10 years. Quoting from Wikipedia, "On Sunday, December 28, 1975, a fire was set to the Emerald City Amphitheater and surrounding gift shops. 2 buildings were destroyed, along with the park's offices, costumes, sound equipment, and props. At the same time, many items were stolen from the park's museum, including Judy Garland's Dorothy dress. And so again, of course, the park had like original pieces from the film, right? It was made up to look like the film. Land of Oz would be rebuilt and managed by a new company, but never recouped. But it sounds like such an interesting park because it has like the Munchkin houses, the yellow brick road, like the hot air balloon. Like there's all of these like really iconic tributes, right, to this, what I've seen the movie. I haven't read the books. But the other thing that I realized researching this is how vast the world of the books are, it seems. Like there's whole pages online, like pages and blogs and about like the maps of the Land of Oz, like outside of this park, like just based on the books, like the flags, the maps, like not the movie, from the books. And so I'm like, oh, I've never read these books.
How many books are there?
I'm not sure exactly, but I think it was somewhat of a series.
I thought there was only 2.
Okay, maybe there's 2.
But I could be wrong.
Yeah, worth maybe a Wizard of Oz is really horrifying, so we could do an episode on that.
Really?
Oh yeah, like a ton of people died on set.
Oh, the production. Yeah.
Though it's been closed since the 80s, the park reopens on Fridays in June for Journey with Dorothy tours and in September for Autumn at Oz. When you visit their website, the park looks very active and full of life. It does not look abandoned, and they have yet to announce the 2024 dates, but promise to do so soon. So I put my name in, and we'll see if I see any of you there.
Neat.
There are so many, not only amusement parks, but abandoned amusement parks, not just in the U.S., but across the globe. And like, there's so many that I wanted to include, but this would have been way too long. Like Crinkly Bottom Park. There's a park in North Carolina called like the Park of the Hills or the Park of the Sky that you can only get to by hiking up now because there's no other way. Like it's just, there's all these crazy, quirky amusement parks. And I think they sort of represent like these big, bright ideas. And then of course they're incredibly expensive to maintain. And the second there's an accident or anything else, it can really like fuck with insurance and all that. But it's sort of fascinating that essentially you have these like graveyards of what was, right? And it's very, it's such duality of like this essence of what was pure joy and innovation to something that's totally overrun and abandoned and forced to sort of sit because, again, what we've talked about, like the money of totally demolishing something. So it's this bizarre little dystopian ecosystem.
You always hear about theme parks closing down or getting run down or whatnot. You very rarely hear about them opening. I wonder what the...
Well, I have an answer to that.
Okay.
Which is that I think when you and I were kids, I mean, you talked about it on this episode, but we both had a lot of local theme parks that we would go to, or local amusement parks. And then both of us, in both of our cases, there were Six Flags that opened up near us.
Right.
And so you end up with Disney, Universal, Six Flags, like these big names with huge investment, and the mom and pop amusement parks can't compete with that.
Of course.
You know, and not only are they safer in some ways because they have the ability to be safer and bigger, they also have the shiny new thing that you talked about.
Yep.
And so they buy out the little parks, and I'm not knocking those things,
Well,
I think safety concerns are,
I do want to clarify.
Yeah.
The shiny new thing was only from before Six Flags bought it.
Got it.
After they did it, they corporate shitified everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had Six Flags New England somewhat nearby when I was growing up. And I remember, being in middle school, but still in high school, but in awe. There was like a whole DC universe, and like these Batman coasters. And it's just like so cool. Even now, I feel like it's so cool to go. Superman, Batman, like all of these incredible. And when you walk around the park, it plays the music. And it just felt like the coolest thing you could do, when you were that age.
I actually also have an abandoned amusement park in my hometown.
The water park one?
I actually have two abandoned amusement parks in my hometown.
Yeah.
So when Charlie Wood, he was the local super rich guy.
Yeah.
That made The Great Escape. He turned it before it was The Great Escape. It was either called, it might have been called Storytown, or
I think it was Storytown.
There's either Storytown or Frontier Town.
Oh, yeah.
Because there was three things. There's Storytown, Frontier Town, and Gaslight Village.
Sounds like I'm there every day.
And one other that looked to be Frontier Town, but I think it was Gaslight Village, actually. That was down the road, and that couldn't compete, and that got shut down.
Yeah.
But also, in just the last few years, I think it actually shut down during the pandemic or maybe just before, was Waterslide World.
Waterslide World.
Yeah, and so now it is
I wish we had gone before it shut down.
fully abandoned water park that is just like full of decrepit mermaid statues.
Yeah, it's weird.
And just like when you see like a lazy river that's just like full of trash and no water, it's weird.
It is. It's also just like it's like that blue that you paint water slides, and then when there's no water in it, it's like
just
this
weird,
the saddest blue.
Because it starts to bleach in the sun, but not uniformly.
Yeah.
It's gross.
Yeah. So, of course, we have to talk about how all of this relates to horror. That is why we're here. I will say this. There are an absolute metric ton of horror movies that take place in amusement parks, carnivals, that sort of thing.
There is not that many.
The majority of them are tragically terrible. It's a weird, I'm saying it right now, it's a phenomenon. I'm calling it out. There are 5 or 6, less than 10 that I would say are good movies. The majority of them are bizarre.
It was kind of odd going through some of this library.
Yeah.
And we pick a movie and it like, wow, this looks good. And then you start watching it and you're like, this got made with $14.
Yeah. Which like I'm all for, but they were like Llamageddon level.
Don't call out Llamageddon.
I'm going
like
to.
that.
It's my personal opinion.
But that's a very fair comparison.
Thank you.
I think a lot of these come from the fact that somebody has access to an amusement park.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided to film a horror movie.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where you can, it's a setting that lends itself well for whatever reasons. If it's an active amusement park, then things can pop out. There's places to hide, right? There's always like carnival scenes in horror movies and things like that.
It's also this, yes, inherently carnivals can be very, very creepy. It's actually, I think you have to work hard to not make it creepy.
Exactly. So it's just an easy.
It is. It's like amusement parks in general are like some super like happy-go-lucky place, right? You think of clowns.
Yeah.
And that it's the same reason why around Halloween it's so easy to make these into like horror-themed parks.
Yeah.
Because
you just need to reskin them a little.
Just the littlest bit. You're just a few spider webs and one guy with a chainsaw away from having a whole Horrorland situation.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about some. Again, I have strong opinions. The first I want to talk about is not strictly an amusement park film, but it is a historically important film. So Freaks from 1932 is a film that I actually watched in film school. And gets a lot of credit, I think, it's a pre-code film, gets a lot of credit because it's essentially about a group of freak show performers who find out that someone in the troupe is going to get this big inheritance and sort of plot to kill them. But it gets a lot of credit because of the way that it depicts all these people who have physical disabilities in like a very empowering and positive light. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So I think for 1932, that's great. And hats off to Freaks. Carnival of Souls from 1962. I know you think it's boring. I like it.
I'm sorry. I just went in with high expectations. It bears a striking similarity in name to Tornado of Souls, which is my favorite Megadeth song. Oh. And this has very little tornado.
No tornado. I would say
Actually,
0.
Actually, that makes more sense now that I said it out loud. There is no tornado in the movie.
There's no tornado.
And yeah, there's not even like any kind of soul vortex situation.
No, it was made in 1962 on like a shoestring budget, very guerrilla style filmmaking. But the thing that I like about this, and I actually have an article up on the website if you guys want to read it more in depth, but the thing that I really like about this movie is that it gives you a definitive ending. There's an ending and the filmmakers make a choice, but it's a definitive ending that can be interpreted in many ways. And I think that's cool.
You like that?
It's not open-ended.
Okay, because open ending is usually lazy filmmaking.
No, it's not open-ended. There's a definitive ending and there is a specific way that this should be interpreted. But given that, there's still like, you know, a bunch of different theories out there, and I just think that's fun.
I mean, it's a very famous movie.
Yeah.
And it's been remade a couple times.
Yeah, it has a few remakes under its belt. Carnival of Blood from 1970. The Funhouse, 1981.
We actually tried to watch Funhouse, but we watched the wrong Funhouse.
We watched Funland.
No, I did this on my own.
Oh.
And I watched Funhouse because, like, it seemed thematic.
Fun.
Thematically correct for this episode.
Sure.
But it was about it was a modern movie about a bunch of, like, washed up reality stars. And they went into, like, a Big Brother type competition, and things get dark real fast.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I did watch this with you. Yeah, you were right. I did watch that too. I forgot about it. Something Wicked This Way Comes from 1983. Carnival of Souls remake from 1998. There's a film that we almost watched, called Dark Ride 2006, which again feels very low budget. Final Destination 3 from 2006 as well.
Which I haven't seen. I've only seen the first two.
Oh.
I feel like Final Destination could be a fun series to do a thing on.
Absolutely.
But
You want to be really panicked for a few months. Yeah.
Well, basing my knowledge off the first two,
Yeah.
I'm just assuming there's like a roller coaster accident that
Correct.
they survive.
Correct.
And then the rest of it has nothing to do with the theme park.
Yeah. But they have a premonition. It follows the same format.
Right. Kind of like the first one should be an airport movie, but it's not.
Right. A film called Amusement from 2008. 2009 gave us both Zombieland and Adventureland. I think Zombieland stands out as one of the better amusement park films.
Is Adventureland a horror movie?
I don't know,
I don't think so at all.
but I just put it on there.
Well, Zombieland,
It's a zombie movie.
it is, and there's definitely some amusement parks in there.
Yeah. Well, the whole premise is that they're trying to get to this amusement park that they think is zombie free. It's like a safe haven.
They're all trying to get to different places.
Well, the kids are. Anyway,
Everyone is. That's how they define their names.
one of them is trying to go.
I see.
Closed for the season from 2010. The Devil's Carnival, which we watched from 2012. A musical.
That was a wild one. And first off, the movie was 56 minutes.
Yeah.
So fuck yeah, filmmakers, for making a movie the exact length that it needs to be, not longer, just to pad it out to your 90.
Yeah. There was something about this film that surprised me because it has this sort of like raunchy carnival vibe to it, which isn't really my thing. But the music had a cleverness, and there was almost like it felt like Halloween Town in some way. Like it felt like kind of fun and whimsical despite the darkness of the subject matter, I guess.
I thought it was great. I'm not a big musical guy, but there's something charming about the devil singing about all the shit that's wrong with the souls.
And you watched Funland.
I did watch Funland.
I only made it through halfway.
So I'll say this right now. It's not a horror film, even remotely. But about 20 minutes before the end, and that's including credits, is when the mildly horrific elements begin, which is so misleading because the box art shows a clown with a gun.
Yeah.
And that does happen in the last bit of the film. And it's like very, very tame.
Yeah.
But the premise is that a guy dies because the mob is kind of moving in on this local amusement park,
Mm-hmm.
and they just want to use it for money laundering, and just like as also an extra form of revenue. And they go deep into it about the inner workings of a theme park, and you just kind of learn about how to run a theme park, which is kind of cool.
Especially if you have the help of the mob.
They weren't very helpful at all. In fact, it was a very successful theme park.
Mm.
And then they kind of stepped in to take the business because it has a high cash flow.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to hide paper trails.
Right.
And, I won't give the movie away because I think it's actually worth a watch. Just don't expect a horror film.
There's also a film that I made through about 10 minutes of, even though I rented it, called Scream Park from 2013, which was truly a Llamageddon.
No, it is not a Llamageddon. This is a higher tier than Llamageddon, although I think Llamageddon has more charm. This movie is 100% just a slasher that takes place in a theme park. You know, low budget everything. It's quirky. It has its moments. I didn't mind it. I thought it was a pretty okay Ultra B movie.
All right. Escape from Tomorrow from 2013. Carousel from 2016.
That's a...
I know you and the
That's
boys
a movie.
watched that.
Yeah, we sure did. The premise is a carousel horse, I forget why, becomes sentient and goes on a murder rampage. And he talks and he is really horny.
Gross.
There are some content advisories for that film.
Copied.
I will say that off the bat.
Great. Hellfest from 2018, which is actually a very scary, it's probably the best example I can think of a modern horror film that's very scary and amusement park themed.
Hellfest is great.
Yeah.
That's actually a very good movie.
We watched that during the pandemic and
It's scary.
yeah, it was scary. It was good.
I mean, I'm biased. I think haunted houses are very scary.
Yeah.
But this happened, it's a haunted house that takes place inside an amusement park.
You won't
So
even go to
it
sleep
counts.
no more. Yeah.
Too scary.
Too scary.
But this is super well done.
Yeah.
I don't even remember if there's supernatural stuff. I think it keeps you
No, I think it's
I think it keeps you guessing. I don't know.
My memory is that it was just a killer, but maybe I'm wrong.
But that's because you've seen the ending, and that's a spoiler for everybody.
Maybe. And then finally, the last one I'll mention, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but the last one I will mention is Us from 2019. Jordan Peele's second film. The reason I'm mentioning it is that the entrance to the other world, if you will, in the movie is the way that we as an audience find out is through the fun house at the Boardwalk amusement park. And so it's not like in the whole film, but it is there multiple times, and it kind of is the access point for the other world.
It's just because there's mirrors and it's an allegory.
Yeah, but the whole thing is at a carnival, at an amusement park.
I get it. You like Jordan Peele.
Why can't I mention it?
You can.
We're talking about Carousel.
You
Can't
just
talk
did.
about
I didn't talk about
a great horror film.
the sequel and the one after that.
I didn't either. I just said a second film.
You forgot to mention the peak of amusement park horror. It's One Day at Horrorland, written by R.L. Stine.
Oh, I forgot that you've been reading the book.
I read an entire novel for this
A
episode.
Goosebumps novel.
Yes.
2 hours.
2 hours and 30 minutes.
All right, tell us about it.
Which I gotta say, it's great. You feel like you read a book because it's not a short story. You can,
It's a novella.
yeah, it's a novella. And first off, I had to put it down. It was too scary.
No, it wasn't.
In the beginning, I was freaked out.
Why?
It triggered me in a lot of ways.
Tell us.
These family goes to a amusement park called Horrorland because they're lost and they just find this thing, and then their fucking car explodes. They're trapped in the middle of nowhere, and it's just it's
Is it an abandoned amusement park or a
no,
functioning
it's
one?
fully functional.
So why wouldn't they go in? Why would they be afraid of it?
I was afraid for them, and then they went in, and some real bad shit happens. It's a scary book. I can't believe this is for kids.
Okay.
I can't talk about it.
How many out of 10? How many stars?
20.
Wow.
No. I mean, it's not amazing. I don't remember these books being nearly as scary as a kid.
Maybe you had a thicker skin back then.
I also didn't read this one as a kid.
I'm slowly wearing you down.
Maybe.
Thinning your skin.
Yep, peeling away. I highly recommend. It's interesting how, despite us having a horror podcast,
Yeah.
Goosebumps doesn't really come up that often. I actually acquired all Goosebumps books in order to be prepared for future episodes.
All of them?
All of them. There's
Damn.
58.
Okay. So are you going to start like a Goosebumps reading club with patrons?
Do you want me to?
Maybe. That sounds kind of fun.
Sure.
Let me know when you pick one up, and we'll alert the masses.
Well, they can start with one day. No, it's too scary. Well, I'll have to pick one at random.
Yeah, that's cool. You bulk bought them.
Yeah.
On digital.
Yes.
Since we live in a studio.
That is correct, and
Great.
they all fit in. It's amazing how many books you can fit in just a little microchip.
Especially little tiny books. So, Alan, why are amusement parks so scary? I'm going to quote again from Levine of the Vox article.
Please quote from Levine at the Vox article.
Quote, "We also go to parks to dream about the future. They're often the first places where we experience innovations at scale. That was the appeal of the original Ferris wheel. When Disney introduced them, the monorail and the people mover offered wide-eyed passengers a chance to step aboard the transit systems of tomorrow. Despite its nostalgic allure, the Coney Island Cyclone still packs a potent punch. Thanks to new launch systems and other technological and design breakthroughs, some coasters today tower over it, blasting riders over 400 feet in the air and well beyond 100 miles an hour."
There's no way there's a faster roller coaster than the Cyclone.
All right, Alan. That's a good thing in a country where people are anxious and divided. We need places where we can encounter one another, share experiences, and enjoy stories together. We need the reassurance, the connection to the past, and the hope for the future that parks provide.
Did you write that?
No.
Who did?
Levine from Vox.
What?
The guy I'm quoting from.
That was a quote?
End quote.
Oh, okay.
But I think his point is an important one, which is why I quoted it versus interpreting it on my own, because I think parks are very symbolic to us, especially right now. But they've always been, right? We've always been divided in some ways. And I think that's also why when you have abandoned parks, which, again, are sort of symbolic in a way that things don't last here, it feels maybe creepier because of the idealism that we place on amusement parks in the first place. And so when you see one that's so run down and abandoned and empty and without laughter and joy in children, it's even further from this dream state that was this utopian state that was sold to you.
Yeah,
it's the opposite of that.
It's the juxtaposition between you're putting horrific elements in something that shouldn't be scary at all.
Yeah.
When you tweak these just a little bit, you also hit Uncanny Valley.
Yeah.
It's the same reason why Five Nights at Freddy's is spooky with the animatronics. You know, it's for kids, and these things are creepy as hell, but they shouldn't be. It's just Uncanny Valley.
Clowns.
Clowns, fuck them.
Fuck them. I'm so thrilled because next episode, we have some very, very haunting amusement park horror stories that we're getting together for you guys. So really, really, I just really love when we can really round out a series and kind of bring it together with the modern horror to top it off.
That's the best.
That's the best. As always, thank you all so much for being here. Happy 2024. Welcome to a new year. We're back. We're excited. We have our resolutions. Mine was to be funnier. What was yours, Alan?
That you are funnier.
To help me be funnier. And we'll talk to you very soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like some bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon to access our patron-exclusive podcast, Horror Movie Club.
Also, head to lunaticsproject.com to check out our spooky merch and apparel.
You can find us at Lunatics Project on Twitter and TikTok, and The Lunatics Project on Instagram and YouTube, where you'll find our short horror films, cemetery tours, and so much more.
And please rate and review. A little feedback goes a long way to help us grow and get more content out there.
Our cover art is by Pilar Kep, and musical bumpers are by Michaela Papa and Jordan Moser.